Hello guys and welcome. At this point our game is pretty much ready and you can go ahead and add your visual effects and sounds and stuff like that, but I'm not gonna get into those kind of things. So in this video I'm gonna implement my own networking solution into the Unity netcode in order to create multiple instances of the server on the same server machine. So right now, if we get a build for our server and upload it on a dedicated server, for example, and if we start connecting clients to that server, all our clients are going to be instantiated inside the same scene. And let's say, for example, you have 20 players ready to play your game, and you only want to include 10 players in each match. What you're gonna do is you're gonna create two different instances of the server, which are two completely separate worlds. And the first 10 players are gonna play in a separate world. The second 10 players are gonna play in another world. And by the way, by world, I mean an instance of the server. I'm not talking about netcode for entities. So this way you can have multiple matches at the same time. So if we take a look at the package manager, Unity has a bunch of packages that could help your multiplayer experience. So we have friends, we have leaderboards, we have lobby, matchmaker, and relay, and a bunch of other services that you could use. And I think some of them are paid services. So if you want to use these services, you can go ahead, but I'm not going to use any of those. So I'm going to use my custom package, which by the way is experimental. And if you're not interested in the direction I'm going, there's tons of other tutorials that could help you set up those Unity built-in multiplayer tools. So if you decided to follow this path with me, to start we need two packages that I have in my GitHub repository. I'm going to put the links in the description. The first one is the client project, which is a Unity project. So you can download the last release available. So I'm going to download the Unity package here for the client. And there's also the server, which is a C# console application, and you can run it using Visual Studio. And also we can download the last release, the source code zip. I have already downloaded them and here they are. That is the client and that is the server. So before we continue, there is this small issue that I like to fix inside the canvas manager, and in the open inventory. Here, let me expand this. When we are looping for the items in the player inventory, I'm going to check to see if the type of the item is not weapon. So if it is not a weapon, then it's probably an ammo or a consumable or any other type of item that has an amount. So here, if the get amount is less or equal than 0, I'm just gonna skip that item and I'm not gonna show it in the inventory. Let's go to the open inventory for loot, and I'm gonna do the same thing here for my local player inventory. I'm gonna continue if the amount of item which is not a weapon is less or equal than 0. The same thing for my character loot target. So if the inventory of the loot target also contains an item which is not a weapon and has an amount less or equal than 0, I'm gonna skip that item. Also, another issue that I like to fix here in the third person controller, let's open that up. And if we take a look at the start function, you see that here we are getting some components and we are destroying some components based on if the character is owner or not. This could cause a problem because when we instantiate the character, after that we set the ownership, and the start could happen before when we setting the ownership. So it could destroy the controls for the owner as well. So to fix that, we could just create a boolean named initialized, and here I could just create a function, call it destroy controllers, and bring these lines of code. I'm gonna cut them, bring them here inside destroy controllers, and inside the update function I am going to check for the initialized, and then I am going to check to see if we are the owner or not. So if the character client ID is greater than 0, which means the ownership of this character has been set, so we could just destroy the controllers, and here I can set the initialized to true if we are the owner. So up here, I could just cut everything from the start function and bring it here inside the place when I set the initialize to true and paste it there. So up there, I could just get rid of that. So this way we could avoid any possible issue. Also, let's return when initialize is false and we are not the owner. And I think we also have a late update, so let's find that and also return if initialize is false. So let's start implementing the real-time networking package. I am going to import the custom package that I've downloaded from GitHub. So here we go. And let's also get rid of this weird warning of the lit.json. I'm just gonna remove that. Back to the editor. Now let's also set up the server. I am going to extract this server file that I've downloaded from GitHub. I'm just gonna rename this to server manager. So this is the project that is gonna control my Netcode server. So if I open this, you can open the SLN file with Visual Studio. So if I expand this, you see there's a bunch of scripts here, and there's also a folder called extensions that contains a script called Netcode. So I'm gonna get into this later. For now, inside the terminal, there is a bunch of settings we can set. For example, the port, let's choose 7777, and there is a string here which determines the location of your SQLite database file. By the way, this file is going to be automatically created, so you don't need to go to that location and actually create any files. This is going to be generated automatically. You just have to specify where that file should be created. So I am on Windows, so I choose drive C. I'm going to create a folder called database, and let's name this tps.db. You don't even need to create the folder. Everything is going to be created automatically. You just need to specify a path to that file. Also, if your project encounters any errors, they are going to be logged at a specific location, and you can determine a path for that. So this is going to be a directory, and this is going to be a file. So we need to set the same port that we set here for our client as well, here in the Developers Hub Real-Time Networking settings. I am going to change the port to 7777, and later on when you upload your server files on a dedicated server, you need to set the IP of that dedicated server here. So that's it for our server and client setup. And by the way, here in the server, if we go to the tools and the package manager, you need to install Microsoft Data.SQLite by Microsoft. If you have an internet connection, it's probably going to automatically install it for you. Back to the Unity editor. Now, if we take a look at the canvas, you see that we have a start server and a start client, but we no longer need those buttons because we're going to do that automatically. So I can go to my scenes and create a new scene, and I am going to name it menu. So let me delete that sample scene. And let's go ahead and actually bring our playground from Unity third-person controller scenes. So I am going to bring that here inside my scenes folder. So if I go to my menu scene and in the build settings, I can delete the playground, add the menu. So now the menu is going to be opened when we start our game, and then we can add the playground as the second scene to our build list. So that's it. If I go to my menu scene, here in the scripts, I could create a new script and name it menu manager. So let's open this menu manager and let's clear all of that. And inside the canvas manager, I can get rid of those buttons, server button and client button. We don't need them anymore. So we could also go to the start function, remove the listeners, and also these two functions, start server and start client. I'm going to remove those as well. And also here we are checking for the open inventory. Let's actually go to the third-person controller, and here in the update function, when we opening our inventory by checking the input inventory, we could check if the inventory is open or not. So if it is open, then we call the close inventory, and if it isn't, we call open inventory. So now let's set up the basics of real-time networking. So basically in the menu scene, we are going to connect to the real-time networking, and inside the game scene, when we're playing the game, we are going to connect to the netcode. And if we are connected to the netcode, we're going to disconnect from the real-time. And when we are connected to real-time, we're going to disconnect from netcode. So in the menu, I'm just going to create a canvas. So inside my canvas, I could create a empty game object. And I'm just going to name it main. And I am going to fill the parent rect transform. Let's also go to the 2D view. On the canvas, I am going to attach the menu manager. So here I am going to create an image for the background. And by the way, the design is up to you. I'm just gonna create a simple UI for the game. So for the color, I am gonna go with this, and we need a text. So let's create a text here, anchor it to up there. So I am going to use this text as a connection status with the real-time networking. Let's name this text connection status, and by default it is disconnected. So let's also create another text. So I'm just gonna duplicate this one, and this is going to be text username. So let me bring this somewhere around here and say username. So for the matchmaking, I could create a button. So let's anchor this one here. And this button is going to be start matchmaking. So also canvas, put it on a scale with a screen size 90/20 1080. So this is going to be button start matchmaking. And we could duplicate this to create a button, name it stop matchmaking. Let's also change the text to stop matchmaking. And it would be better to create a text. Let's actually go ahead and duplicate one of these texts. I'm going to use the username. So let's bring it here and anchor it to the bottom right corner of the screen. And I am going to bring it here, align it to the center, set it to 20 maybe. And for the text, I am going to say searching for now. Designing UI is not exactly my specialty, so it's up to you. You can design it however you want. Now we go to the menu manager, and then we can create a text for connection status, username, and matchmaking, and also two buttons for start and stop matchmaking. So first, before I forget, let's go to the UI and actually assign the values for these variables. That is my status text, that is the username, that is the matchmaking text. So that's start button, and that is stop button. So back to the menu manager, I am going to create two regions just to keep my code organized. So the first region is going to be client, and I am going to create another one for the server. And here, let's create the awake function. So in the client, we have a start matchmaking function and a stop matchmaking function. Here in the awake function, let me disable both buttons for start and stop matchmaking. So in the, let's say, session manager, I am going to create a enum. I am going to name it role, and either our project is server or client. And I'm also creating a variable and a static variable for role. So we can set this role value inside our menu manager, because our menu is going to be the first scene that is going to be opened. So in the awake function, let's actually set the role. I'm going to say if application platform equals to a Windows server. Let's also add other type of platform. By the way, I haven't tested the real-time networking package on a Linux server, and I have only tested on Windows server, so I don't know if it's going to work on a Linux server. Now I'm going to add an OR platform is a Linux server, let's actually add a other type of server as well. We have OSX server. So later on, when we build our game for the server, we're not gonna build it using Windows, Mac, or Android, or any of those. We're gonna build it for dedicated server, and it is going to be automatically detected here in the menu manager. If the platform is any of those dedicated servers, then session manager.role equals to server. Otherwise, it is going to be client. So that's something we could do to automatically detect whether we are using server or client. And now that value is stored in the session manager.role, and we could access it basically everywhere in the project. And let's also create a singleton for our menu manager. I'm just going to use the session manager here. Let's bring the singleton, copy, paste here, change it to menu manager. So let's also go to the client region. I am also gonna create a client awake, and let's go to the server region and create a server awake. So obviously in the awake function, we can call the server awake in the server area, and also client awake if our platform is a client. Let's also cut these two lines and bring them up there. So that's it for the awake function. This way we don't need to do anything. The project is automatically going to detect whether it is server or client. So in the client awake, let's actually go ahead and set the matchmaking text to empty. Let's also set the username text to empty, and set the listener for start and stop matchmaking buttons. So if we are client, we want to connect to the server. So let's create a function to connect, and I'm also going to create a function to set the connection status. Basically, it's going to take a string and a color, and it is going to set the text of the connection status and also the color of the connection status. So inside the connect function, I'm going to set the connection status to disconnected and color red. And let's also call the connect inside client awake. So let's go ahead and add the namespace for the real-time networking client. And now we can use the real-time networking functions and events. So in the awake, we are going to attempt to connect to the server. Either our attempt is going to be successful or not. To find out if our attempt to connect was successful, then we need to start listening on an event inside the real-time networking on connecting to server result. So I'm gonna say plus equal and create the event for it. Let's name it on connecting to server result. So it's gonna get a boolean which determines either the connection was successful or not. First, we're gonna start listening on the event, then we are going to call the connect function, and inside the connect function we can use real-time networking dot connect. That's it. It is going to start attempting to connect to the server and call this event when it's finished. So let's also create the onDestroy function, and if our role in the session manager is client, we can just go ahead and remove the listener for the on connecting to server result by saying minus equal. So it is always good to remove the listeners on destroy when we quitting the scene. So if the connection happened, then we need to check the successful to know that. So if it wasn't successful, let's actually create a parameter. Let's do it up here. I'm gonna name it reconnect period, which for now I'm just gonna use 3 seconds. So if the connection failed, after 3 seconds, we're gonna try to connect again. So to do that, let's actually go ahead and create a function called reconnect. It's gonna be enumerator, and it's gonna yield return wait for seconds, the amount of reconnect period, which is 3 seconds, and then after that, it's gonna call the connect function again. So if the connection was not successful, we're gonna call the reconnect function. But if it was successful, Then we're gonna set the connection status to connected with color green. So that's pretty much how the connecting to the server works in the real-time networking. But there's another scenario. Let's say if you are connected, suddenly your internet gets cut off and you no longer are connected to the server. So real-time networking actually has an event for that. So let's start listening on that event. It's called on disconnected from server. So if you are connected to the server and for any reason you lose your connection, this event is going to be called. So I am going to start listening on this event. So let's actually rename it to on disconnected. When we are getting disconnected, I am going to set the matchmaking text to empty and also disable the start and stop button. And obviously we're going to set the connection status to disconnected, and we are going to call reconnect. Let's also remove the listener inside the undestroy. Here it is. So that's it for our listener. So now that we have successfully connected to the network, the first step that we need to take to actually authenticate, there is actually a function inside the real-time networking to do that. So here, when the connection is successful, I am going to call real-time networking authenticate function. So you can just leave that empty if you want. You don't need to pass anything, and it is going to automatically create a new account for you and assign a username for you. But if you want to create a login form and a sign up form, so you could do that. You could actually pass a username, a password, and a boolean called creative not exist. So what this does is actually, when you pass a username and a password, depending on the value of this boolean, it's going to do different tasks. So if the creative not exist is true, which means it's going to look for this username and password, and if it finds any account, it's going to log in using that. And if it doesn't find anything, it is going to create that account for you with that username. But if this is false, when it is not going to find any account with this username and password, it's just going to return an error. So for this project, I'm not going to create any login form and anything like that. You could do that if you want. So I'm just going to leave that empty. So when we call authenticate, we need to start listening on the event to get a response for that. It is called on authentication. So let's start listening on this event. So this event is going to take a response, which is determining either the authentication was successful or not. And if it wasn't successful, it's going to give you some info about what the exactly error was. And if the authentication was successful, it's going to return a account data for you. Let's actually take a look at the response. So if response equals to, if we take a look at the options, the successful is obviously when you successfully authenticated. And if it is successful, then account data is not going to be null. It's going to be containing some data. But if it is not successful, then that account data is just going to be null. There's a bunch of other errors that you can take a look at, but I'm only interested in successful. So I am going to set the username text to the account data.username. Otherwise, for now, I'm just going to use a debug.log, failed to authenticate the player. We could handle that later. And not to forget to remove the listener on destroy. That's it. We can now go to the Unity editor. And here we are in the menu scene. And the only script in this scene is menu manager. We can play the game now. And you see it is disconnected. So now we need to start the server. And in this newest version of the real-time networking, I actually implemented SQLite, which is built in the server. And you don't need to do anything. You just start the server. That's it. First, you need to determine a name for the database, which is going to be automatically created. And you just start the server. And if we take a look at our client, you see this text should change to connected. So let me allow that. Now, as you can see, we are connected, and that is a username that is automatically has been generated for us. This is the server console, and this is our client. The authentication happened, and if I close the server right now, it's going to change to disconnected, and I can start the server again, and it should turn back to connected again with the same username. So this is our menu, and as you can see, our buttons and text is disabled here. So we can go ahead and simply enable the start matchmaking button when the authentication is successful. So let's find the on authentication. Here it is. So we're gonna set the username, and also we could set the start matchmaking button GameObject to true. Let's start the server first. And it doesn't matter, you can start the client first. It makes no difference. It's just going to automatically connect whenever the server is available. Here is our client. It is connected. That is player 1. And we can start the matchmaking. Obviously, right now, nothing happens. So I'm going to do that in the next video. There is a matchmaking system already implemented in the real-time networking. So we don't need to actually do anything. We could just click the button and we can call a function. And that's it. It's going to automatically do the matchmaking for us. By the way, I need to mention it again. Unity already has some packages that you could use. You don't have to use this package. Still, their service is awesome. There is nothing wrong with them. Maybe they're even better than this package. So it is up to you to decide. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.